On the way to work, I saw her. My heart stopped, and for a moment I wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, that my eyes were deceiving me, that my mind was distorting reality for some irrational reason. But no. It was her. In his car. Laughing. Relaxed. Accomplice. The window wasn't completely closed, and before I could even process what was happening, it happened. That kiss. That damn kiss that changed everything. It wasn't a casual kiss, it wasn't careless. It was an intense kiss, the kind you only give when you want. My stomach dropped and my breathing hitched. The blood drained from my face. I was frozen for a moment, as if my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. But then, something inside me woke up, something visceral, something that couldn't be ignored. Without thinking, without measuring consequences, I followed them. I didn't know exactly what I would do, but I knew I couldn't just go to work and pretend nothing had happened. Traffic was slow, which gave me enough time to observe. The car followed a path I knew well, a discreet hotel in the city center, one of those that doesn't attract attention, made for meetings that need to be hidden. A sharp blow to the stomach. I wanted to speed up, hit the back of the car, do something that would force them to face me there, at that moment. But I controlled myself. Hatred pulsed through my veins, betrayal burned on my skin, but I needed to see how far it went. I wanted to catch them both in the act. I wanted definitive proof. My fingers shook as I gripped the steering wheel. I had never felt such deep and intense anger. I had never felt so deceived. Their car stopped and I parked a few meters behind. I saw them come down, as if they were any couple, as if they weren't destroying someone in the process. There was no guilt on their faces. There was desire, a rush, an unbridled lust that made me feel nauseous. Follow them. My every step was a blow to my own dignity. Their every step was a nail in the coffin of what I thought was my life. I entered the hotel soon after. I tried not to look desperate, but the adrenaline was taking over me. I waited, the receptionist handed over the key. They entered the elevator. I knew what that meant. A minute later, the room number was announced on the elevator's digital panel. I went up the stairs. My hands were sweating. My heart was at war with my reason. I knew I didn't want to see it, but at the same time, I needed it. My legs were shaking, but they didn't stop. When I reached the door, silence swallowed me. I put my ear to it, closed my eyes. Laughter. Murmurs. Muffled sounds. I didn't need to see it to know what was going on inside. Betrayal materialized in every noise, every movement, every whisper that escaped that room. But I saw it. I opened the door. And I saw it. My voice came out before I could stop myself, a scream choked with hate. I know everything. I saw every terrible scene of you two together. I'll unmask you in front of everyone. They both froze. Her gaze met mine, and for a second, I saw panic. I saw fear. But not the fear of those who feel guilt, not the fear of those who regret it. I saw the fear of those who were caught. The fear of someone who couldn't hide it well enough. Her boss, on the other hand, was unfazed. He wore that air of superiority, that despicable arrogance of someone who thinks he can have everything, including another man's wife. He stood up slowly, straightened his shirt, and smiled cynically. Calm down, let's talk. To talk. I wanted to laugh. To talk. After everything. My mind screamed as my fists clenched. I looked at her again, waiting for something, any reaction that would tell me there was still something to save, something other than this blatant betrayal. But her silence was the worst response I could have received. It was as if, in that moment, everything we had experienced together simply evaporated. As if I didn't mean anything. As if our story were just a detail, a setback in the midst of her desire for another man. Betrayal is not just the act itself, it is the destruction of everything that was once sacred. It's the certainty that, while you trusted, while you loved, on the other side there was only a lie being fed every day. And there I was, standing in front of the naked truth. I don't know exactly what happened next. I know I left there in a whirlwind of anger and pain. I know that the images of that room were recorded in my mind like a horror movie that repeats itself over and over again. I know that my life from then on would never be the same. But what I didn't know, what I could never imagine, was that that betrayal would be just the beginning. That the real shock was yet to come. That the humiliation I felt that day would be nothing compared to what I was about to do. And that, in the end, I wouldn't be the only one to lose everything. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal is never romanticized, will never be supported and will always have consequences. All the stories are fictional, but they reflect the devastating impact that disloyalty has on people's lives. The moral is clear: cheating destroys, deceives and leaves irreversible marks. Now, get ready for a shocking, intense story full of twists and turns. Listen until the end, and draw your own conclusions. The morning began with the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the kitchen, an aroma that for years had symbolized a home, a refuge. Michael straightened his tie in front of the mirror while his wife, Emily, organized the breakfast table, an almost automatic gesture, without the same energy as in other times. The couple had been together for 12 years, and although the marks of time had softened their smiles and replaced spontaneous touches with predictable routines, there was still a bond there, something built with complicity and sacrifice. Emily used to be a vibrant woman, full of ambitions and plans, but, over the years, she seemed to have settled into a life without so many surprises, while Michael found himself increasingly immersed in work, seeking professional growth in a demanding corporate environment. They met while still in college, a romance that began impulsively, full of passion, and that, over the years, transformed into something more stable, solid, but also worn down by time. Emily worked as an administrative assistant at a large company, a position that offered security but not the excitement she used to seek when she was younger. The weight of responsibilities had made her more restrained, less spontaneous. She dedicated herself to the house, the marriage, the structured routine they had built together, but, at times, the nostalgia for something different reached her, invading her thoughts like an uncomfortable whisper. Michael, on the other hand, was always methodical, a man of well-defined habits, someone who valued stability above all else. He worked as an engineer, had an established career, a stable financial life and a very clear vision of what he expected for the future. For him, marriage was an unbreakable commitment, something based on respect and loyalty, but, without realizing it, he had allowed automatism to take over the relationship, reducing moments of genuine connection to rare flashes in the midst of the daily rush. The house where they lived reflected who they were. A quiet neighborhood, simple decor, without excess, but comfortable. The kind of home that gave the feeling of security, of a well-planned, yet predictable life. Photos from the wedding were still displayed around the house, alongside souvenirs from trips taken years before, when routine had not yet swallowed spontaneity. There was a comforting familiarity to it, but also a quiet absence of something that was once there. Time had shaped them both, but the question was whether they were still walking together or just sharing the same space without really seeing each other. Emily's job required her to spend long hours at the company, dealing with tight deadlines and endless meetings. She had a cordial relationship with her colleagues, but it was inevitable that she would spend more time with some people than others. Her boss, Richard, was a charismatic man, someone who exuded confidence and who, over time, became a constant presence in her daily life. He had a position of power, was admired by employees and knew how to use his influence to create an environment where he stood out. Emily always maintained a professional demeanor, but it was undeniable that Richard possessed a natural magnetism, an almost instinctive ability to make those around him feel special. For her, however, Richard was just her superior, someone she needed to get along with to guarantee her place in the company. Michael rarely asked about his wife's work with genuine interest. He listened to her when she talked about tiring meetings, difficult deadlines, but he never went deeper into the subject. For him, Emily's work was just part of the routine, something that didn't demand his full attention. If only he had realized that, in recent months, Emily came home more distracted, more thoughtful, perhaps he would have understood that something was changing within her. Small details that went unnoticed by him were piling up, creating an invisible abyss between the two. Emily wasn't unhappy, but there was an uneasiness growing inside her, a feeling she couldn't name but that intensified every day. Michael, in turn, was focused on a great opportunity at work. He was about to be promoted, something that required more time, more dedication, more overtime. He justified his absence by telling himself that he was doing it for them, for the future, for the comfort of his family. But while he worried about tomorrow, Emily felt like the present was slipping through her fingers. Their marriage was still stable, but it was no longer vibrant. There were no more surprises, no more unexpected gestures, just the predictability of a routine that was repeated every day. And perhaps that was what scared her most. Weekends, which used to be full of plans, had turned into days of passive rest, where everyone occupied themselves with their own distractions. Michael enjoyed watching his shows, doing small repairs around the house, reading about engineering and technology. Emily, on the other hand, found herself increasingly lost on social media, watching other people's lives unfold with an intensity that she no longer felt in her own. There was a repressed desire inside her, a desire for something she couldn't express but that made her chest tighten in certain silent moments. The dinners, previously full of conversations and laughter, had become silent meetings, where each person limited themselves to talking about the basics, without delving into any subject in depth. It wasn't for lack of love, but perhaps for lack of effort. They still slept in the same bed, they still exchanged kisses before leaving the house, but everything seemed mechanical, as if it were just a script being followed half-heartedly. The touch no longer had the same meaning, the looks no longer carried the same intensity. Michael didn't understand because he was convinced everything was fine. Emily didn't talk because she thought maybe it was just in her head. But it was something real. Something that, sooner or later, would find a way to manifest itself. The routine continued, the days repeated themselves, and every little detail that was not noticed accumulated into something bigger. The absence of questions, the lack of attention to detail, the silences that became increasingly longer. What started as small gaps in the relationship had now become an empty space that neither of them were trying hard to fill. Emily had no intention of changing anything, but at the same time, she felt something was changing inside her. Michael saw no reason to worry, but he ignored signs that were there, clear, visible, asking to be noticed. The feeling of stability was an illusion that the two shared without realizing that, at any moment, the ground beneath them could collapse. The days passed without any major changes, a sequence of appointments, schedules and tasks that filled Michael and Emily's routine without leaving room for deep questions. Michael was increasingly involved in his work, focused on the possibility of the promotion that awaited him. The pressure in the office was intense, the responsibilities doubled, and he justified each extra hour as a sacrifice for the future, without realizing that in the present something was slipping out of his hands. Emily, on the other hand, surrendered to the routine without much resistance, but something inside her seemed to stir, a silent restlessness that she avoided confronting directly. Her days were also filled with tasks, meetings and deadlines, but, in the midst of all this, there were moments of pause, gaps in which her thoughts wandered, searching for something that she herself could not name. And it was in these gaps that Richard emerged. Richard had a natural way of imposing himself in environments, a charisma that effortlessly attracted people to him. In the office, he was respected, admired, and his presence seemed to carry a magnetic energy. Emily, as his assistant, was always in direct contact with him, coordinating meetings, screening calls, closely monitoring his schedule. In the beginning, it was just professional, a well-structured working relationship. But, little by little, interactions became more personal, conversations that went beyond the office, jokes shared, looks that lasted a second longer than they should have. Richard knew how to read people, understand their weaknesses, explore their hidden needs, and with Emily it was no different. He realized before she did that there was a space inside her that wasn't being filled, a need to be seen, wanted, to feel again the emotion that had seemed absent from her life for so long. Meetings between them became more frequent, disguised as work, protected by the naturalness of the corporate routine. Lunches that lasted longer than necessary, conversations that escaped professionalism, looks that said more than any word said. Emily didn't see anything wrong with that, at least at first. He was just someone she felt good around, someone who seemed to see her in a way that Michael no longer did. But as the days passed, that fine line between friendship and something more began to blur. The occasional touch on the arm during a conversation, the way Richard looked at her when she laughed at something he said, the subtle closeness that became more and more natural. Emily found herself thinking about him at random moments, felt butterflies in her stomach when she saw him in the morning, and began to care more about her appearance than she did before. Small details, almost imperceptible, but together, they formed a dangerous picture. Michael didn't notice anything. Her confidence in her marriage was unshakable. For him, Emily was a constant, part of an equation already solved. He didn't notice the subtle changes, the signs that appeared in small everyday things. I didn't see how Emily's eyes sparkled differently when she talked about work, how she seemed more excited, how her attention seemed to always be divided between the present and something invisible. He arrived late, tired, and when he finally lay down next to his wife, he didn't notice the distance that grew between them each night. Her touch was no longer the same, the kisses were quick, the hugs rare, but for him, all of this was just a phase, something normal in any long relationship. He saw no danger, no reason to worry. The first time Emily allowed herself to cross a real boundary happened almost imperceptibly. A Friday, an after-work dinner, any excuse to spend a little more time with Richard. The conversation flowed effortlessly, the smiles came easily, and when he touched her hand across the table, she didn't flinch. The touch was brief, but the electricity remained. Something inside her awakened, something she didn't know still existed. Guilt came soon after, a weight in her chest, an insistent voice telling her that this was wrong, that she needed to stop. But the guilt wasn't enough to keep her away. On the contrary, it only seemed to intensify the desire. The more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. The meetings became frequent, disguised as professional needs, protected by well-constructed excuses. Emily felt her heart quicken when she received a message from Richard, butterflies in her stomach every time they were alone in a meeting room. And then, inevitably, it happened. A moment of hesitation, a look too long, a slow approach until there was no more space between them. The first kiss was intense, forbidden, and the feeling of transgression only made everything more exciting. Emily felt her breathing hitch, her body reacting in a way it hadn't done in years. She should have stopped there, she should have walked away, she should have remembered everything she had built alongside Michael. But it didn't stop. The kiss was repeated, the desire grew, and when she realized it, she was already too involved to go back. The messages became bolder, the encounters more frequent, and each time she told herself it would be the last time, she found an excuse to continue. Richard knew what he was doing, knew how to keep her there, trapped in this dangerous game. He made her feel special, wanted, alive. Emily didn't recognize herself, but she didn't want to stop either. The guilt came in waves, but never strong enough to stop her. She told herself that Michael would never know, that it was just an escape, something without major consequences. But the truth is that every betrayal has an expiration date, and hers was about to explode irreversibly. That morning, Michael left for work as he did every day, without suspecting anything. He grabbed his coffee, gave his wife a quick kiss and left without noticing the hesitation in her eyes. Emily, in turn, spent the day restless, her mind divided between what she was doing and what she knew would happen later. Richard had asked her out after work, and she knew this time it wasn't just dinner. It was something more. Something that could not be denied or explained innocently. The day dragged by, and when the time came, she felt her heart racing. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, a mix of excitement and fear, an internal conflict that she tried to ignore. But in the end, she made her decision. Michael left work a little earlier than usual, a spontaneous gesture, a desire to surprise Emily, to break the routine. Traffic was slower than normal, and as I drove, I thought about how it had been a while since they had a moment of their own, without distractions. Maybe they could have dinner together, talk like they used to. But then, something caught his attention. In the car in front of you, something that made your stomach turn, your chest tighten, your breathing hitch. He saw. And in that instant, everything changed. Michael's world seemed to have gone off-kilter the moment his eyes caught the scene inside the car. The kiss. The touch. Her expression. He felt the blood drain from his face, his chest tighten in a way that made breathing difficult. His hands were sweating on the steering wheel, his knuckles white from his firm grip. He wanted to believe it was a mistake, an error in perception, but the reality was before his eyes, raw, irrefutable. Emily, his wife, the woman with whom he shared years of complicity and plans, was in the arms of another man, and not just anyone, but Richard, her boss. The car was moving in traffic, and he followed it without thinking, unable to control himself, simply dominated by a mixture of hatred and disbelief. With each kilometer covered, the knot in his stomach grew tighter, a feeling of deep betrayal eating away at everything he believed to be solid. The road took them to a discreet hotel, the kind of place no one notices, made for meetings that must remain secret. Michael parked a safe distance away, his hands shaking as he turned off the engine. He saw them get out of the car, she fixing her hair, smiling in a way she hadn't smiled at him in a while. Her boss with the posture of someone who is sure of his possession, guiding her into the building as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Michael's heart hammered in his chest, a chaotic rhythm between pain and anger. He didn't think, he just acted. He got out of the car and walked through the reception without worrying about being discreet. Each step was a blow to his own dignity, a warning that everything he knew was about to fall apart. In the hotel hallway, his body was buzzing with adrenaline. Room numbers lined up before him, each representing the possibility of a scene he never wanted to imagine. With each step, a part of him screamed for him to stop, for him not to see, for him to spare himself. But another part, more fierce, demanded that he face the truth, that he see with his own eyes what he already knew to be real. He reached the right door, heard muffled laughter on the other side. Without hesitation, he hit hard, once, twice, 3 times. The silence that followed was like a knife piercing his chest. Within seconds, hesitant footsteps approached. The door opened, and there she was. Emily froze. Her gaze met Michael's, and all he saw was panic. Not guilt, not remorse. Just the fear of being caught. Michael's blood boiled, his breathing heavy. Her boss appeared right behind, wearing only his shirt partially open, a look of discomfort and boredom on his face, as if the presence of her betrayed husband was just a temporary inconvenience. Michael felt the world spin around him, felt his throat catch before his voice exploded, filled with fury and pain. He didn't scream, he didn't make a fuss. His voice was cold, sharp, filled with a devastating certainty. He didn't want to hear excuses, he didn't want explanations. He just wanted her to feel the same pain he felt at that moment. Emily stuttered, tried to speak, but her own conscience prevented her. There was no explanation for what she did, and she knew it. His hands shook, his eyes filled with tears, but there was nothing more to be said. Richard, on the other hand, straightened his posture, crossed his arms and smiled with superiority. The contempt in his eyes only increased Michael's fury. The silence in the corridor became unbearable, a weight filled with something about to explode. And then, Michael laughed. A bitter, humorless laugh, a sound of complete disbelief. What he had before him was the destruction of everything he believed to be true. There was no more marriage, no more trust, just the wreckage of something that had once been love. What happened next unfolded in seconds, but it felt like a long, cruel nightmare. Emily tried to justify herself, but her choked voice only made everything more pathetic. She tried to touch Michael, but he recoiled as if her touch were poison. His eyes were fixed on her, but now no longer with love, no longer with any feeling she could recognize. There was only the shadow of the man he once was. Michael turned, took a few steps, but then stopped. He felt something inside him pulse, something that had been there for a while, buried beneath layers of routine and blind trust. Something he never wanted to acknowledge. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers once more. And then, without needing anything else, he blurted out the truth he had ignored for so long. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It wasn't just about Richard. What made his chest burn now wasn't just the kiss he saw, or the touching he knew was happening inside. It was something much bigger. And in that moment, Michael realized that Emily never really chose him. It was never him. It was never about love. All of that was an illusion created on unstable ground. The truth came as a blow. Michael knew, with painful clarity, that Emily and Richard had a past. A past she never told, a past she hid for years. Richard wasn't just the boss. He was always there, always the shadow that hung over their relationship without Michael knowing. The betrayal didn't start now. What happened there was just the continuation of something that never ended. Emily never forgot Richard. Marriage was never the final destination, but only a temporary refuge until the right opportunity arose. Michael felt the weight of every year spent with her, of every moment he believed he was enough when, in fact, he never was. Emily's look changed. Now there was something more than fear. There was a bitter understanding, a forced acceptance of what she was trying to avoid. She tried to deny it, tried to argue, but the words died before they could be spoken. She knew it was true. Michael too. Richard just smiled, as if everything was going exactly as he predicted. The silence between them was worse than any words. It was the final sentence of something that was already doomed from the beginning. Michael took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment and, when he opened them again, he felt a strange peace come over him. He no longer needed answers. He didn't need anything else. He just turned his back and walked away, leaving behind not just a betrayal, but an entire life that was never real. And as he walked out of that hotel, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. And that was exactly what needed to happen. Michael walked out of the hotel without looking back, as if leaving that place would also free himself from the weight of betrayal, of the farce that for so long he had believed was a real marriage. But even with the anger burning inside him, an emptiness began to form in his chest. It wasn't just about the pain of betrayal, it wasn't just about the fact of being deceived, it was about everything he had built in his mind and which, at that moment, was crumbling like a sandcastle washed away by the tide. The cold night air seemed to cut into his skin, but nothing compared to the cold he felt inside, an ice that spread and made each step feel heavy. He got into the car, but didn't start the engine immediately. His fingers were trembling on the steering wheel, his breathing was ragged, and for a moment he felt like everything inside him was about to fall apart. He couldn't go home, not now. The home he thought was a refuge was just another illusion, a place where he lived next to someone who was never really there. Emily left the hotel a few minutes later, hesitantly, her expression filled with something between despair and shame. She looked around, looking for Michael, but all she found was a void that perfectly reflected what she herself felt. Richard was still inside, probably satisfied, convinced that everything would go according to his plan. But Emily knew things had gone too far. She tried to call Michael, but the phone went to voicemail. Tried again. Nothing. She despaired. She ran to the street, searching the parked cars, but he was already gone. Anguish took over his chest. She didn't know what to do, didn't know how to fix something that might never be fixed. Richard appeared at the hotel door, his eyes carrying an amused look, satisfied with how the situation was going, as if everything was a game that he already knew he would win. Emily felt repulsed. Not from him, not just from him, but from herself. Of what it had become. Then he had allowed. She looked at him with a blank expression and, without saying anything, walked away. Richard didn't hold her, didn't try to convince her to stay. He just chuckled sideways, as if he knew that no matter what happened, he had already gotten what he wanted. Emily knew that if there was ever a time to make a decision, it was now. But deep down, something inside her screamed that maybe it was already too late. Michael drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring around him. He wanted to feel anger, he wanted to feel pure hatred, but what dominated his mind was a deep tiredness, an exhaustion that went beyond the physical. He stopped at a gas station, got out of the car and rested his hands on the hood, taking a deep breath. The night was cold, the sky was clear, but he felt nothing but the storm inside him. He thought about calling someone, but who? Who could understand what he was feeling? Who could say something that would actually make a difference? He didn't want pity, he didn't want empty advice. He just wanted to erase everything. Emily arrived home a short time later, but the house was empty. No sign of Michael, no note, no nothing. His absence was a brutal blow, a reminder that perhaps he really was gone for good. She sat on the couch, her hands shaking, her mind chaotic. She always thought that if she was ever found out, there would be a chance to make things right. But now, faced with the naked reality, she realized how fragile that assumption was. The phone rang. She answered in a hurry, but the voice that came from the other end was not Michael's. Richard. She closed her eyes and pursed her lips, feeling a lump form in her throat. He spoke as calmly as ever, as if nothing was happening, as if everything was still under his control. He called her to his apartment, said that things had already gotten there, that there was no point in her trying to fight the inevitable. The proposal made her stomach turn. She hung up without answering and threw the phone away. She wanted to erase everything. I wanted to go back in time. But now, the weight of the consequences crushed her. Michael didn't know how long he spent standing still, just staring into space, trying to organize the chaos inside him. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the display, expecting to see Emily's name, but it wasn't. It was someone he didn't expect. He answered hesitantly, and the voice on the other end was like a punch in the stomach. Michael, we need to talk. It's about Richard. It's about Emily. It's about something you need to know. His heart stopped for a second. He felt his breathing catch. He thought he had seen everything, that he had felt everything, but the truth is that the worst was yet to come. He swallowed and asked, his voice barely audible. What do you mean by that? The voice on the other end hesitated for a moment, as if it knew it was about to collapse everything further. Then the words came, and each one hit Michael like a sharp blade. It's not the first time. Richard has done this before. With other women. But with Emily it was different. It's not just one case. It never was. Richard planned this. He was always waiting for the right moment. He knew she would come back to him sooner or later. Because, Michael, the truth is, she never forgot. The world around Michael disappeared. His chest tightened in a way he had never felt before. He felt ridiculous, naive. He thought it was just a betrayal, just a wrong choice. But no. It was much more than that. It was something that had been there for a long time, something he never noticed. He always thought the love between him and Emily was strong, but the truth is he was fighting a ghost, a past that never went away. He gripped the phone tightly, his hands shaking. Are you sure about this? His voice was low, almost like a whisper. I have. And if you want to know the worst, Michael, she knew. She always knew. And she never told you. Michael felt everything collapse around him. He hung up the phone without saying anything else. What else was there to be said? He felt a bitter taste in his mouth, as if everything inside him was falling apart. He looked at the road in front of him and knew he could no longer go home. Because that house was never really his. The life he thought he had was never real. And now, he needed to decide what to do with this truth. Michael hung up the phone and stood there, his fingers still clutching the device as if that could prevent the words spoken by that voice from becoming real. But it was already too late. The weight of the revelation sunk his chest into a turbulent sea of thoughts. Everything he had believed about his marriage, about the woman with whom he shared years of his life, about the loyalty he swore was mutual, it had all been a big lie. It wasn't just betrayal. It was something planned. Something that was already written before he even realized it. Emily never forgot Richard. She was never fully by his side. Michael wasn't a definitive love, he was just a break, a safe haven, a fleeting comfort until the storm of her desire took her back to where she really wanted to be. He felt his jaw muscles tense, his breathing heavy, as if his entire body was locked in an internal war between exploding or simply disappearing. The steering wheel felt distant beneath his hands. He could drive anywhere, but where? Home, where every piece of furniture carried the memory of a love that never existed. To a bar, where alcohol might numb, for a few moments, the unbearable pain of the truth. To the office, where you would sink into work and try to forget that one day you put your happiness in the wrong hands. Neither of these options felt right. None of them could undo what had happened. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, he knew what he needed to do. He needed to confront her. When he arrived at the house, the door was unlocked. The air inside the place he once called home felt heavy, thick, filled with everything that hadn't been said. Emily was sitting on the couch, her eyes swollen, her body curled up as if she wanted to disappear there. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and for a moment, the two just stared at each other. The silence between them was almost deafening. Michael walked slowly into the room, closed the door behind him, and stood, as if he were staking out a battlefield. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but he raised his hand, a small gesture that instantly silenced her. He didn't want excuses, he didn't want lame justifications that she could have rehearsed during the hours she was there waiting for him. He wanted the truth. But not the truth she would choose to tell, he wanted the truth she never had the courage to admit. She tried to say something, but he didn't give her space. His voice was cold, firm, carrying a weight she couldn't ignore. Since when? She took a deep breath, looked away, hesitated. Her silence was confirmation that he already knew. Since always, right? Emily closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, tears began to flow. I tried to love you. The sentence hit Michael like a punch. He felt the ground open beneath his feet. What was supposed to be a confession became a definitive condemnation. Did you try? She used that word, as if love were an effort, a duty, a burden. As if it were a flawed project, something she tried to build but never managed to finish. Did you try? And that? Was I a failed attempt on your life? Emily flinched, guilt etched into every line of her expression. I never wanted it to be like this. I wanted it to work. I wanted to love you the way you loved me. Michael laughed, a laugh without any joy, just a bitter sound of someone who finally sees the size of the mistake. But he couldn't. She didn't respond. And in that silence, everything was there. The cruelest confession of all. Richard, it was always him, wasn't it? Even before me. Even while you were with me. Emily was crying, but now Michael no longer felt sorry. I no longer felt compassion. He felt like he was in front of someone he had never really met. It's not like that, Michael. No. So explain to me. Explain what I am to you. A detour? A hobby? An error? She put her hands to her face, sobbed, tried to formulate words that made sense, but there was no meaning to it. He wanted to hate her completely, but what he felt was something worse than hate. It was disappointment. It was suffocating grief. Emily finally looked at him, her eyes full of pain. "I didn't want to hurt you." Michael shook his head in disbelief. "You didn't want to hurt me. You made me believe we had something real. You made me think I was enough for you. Did you build this life with me knowing you would never truly love me?" She opened her mouth but couldn't respond. "Say. Tell the truth. At least once." Emily took a deep breath, swallowed hard, and then finally admitted, her voice lower than a whisper. "I could never forget him." Michael felt as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. He closed his eyes, passed his hands over his face and stayed there for a moment, absorbing every word. And then, slowly, something inside him changed. Anger was replaced by something worse, indifference. He didn't want any more answers. I didn't want to hear her voice anymore trying to fix what could never be fixed. He just wanted to get out of there. He just wanted to start over. Emily noticed the change, realized that, at that moment, Michael had completely disconnected from her. She tried to hold his hand, but he pulled away as if her touch were made of broken glass. "Michael, please." He looked at her one last time, without hate, without resentment. Just with the certainty that he would never look at her the same way again. "You made your decision a long time ago, Emily. It just took a while for me to realize it." And then, without saying anything else, he grabbed his keys and walked out the door. There was nothing more to be said. There was nothing left to be saved. Michael walked to the car, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. The pain was still there, the disappointment still burned inside him, but now there was something new. Something he hadn't expected to feel so soon. Freedom. Michael drove aimlessly for hours, the silence in the car almost deafening, a brutal contrast to the turmoil unfolding inside him. The streets blurred before his eyes, the city still alive around him, oblivious to the fact that his life had just fallen apart. He didn't know where to go, he just knew he couldn't go back home, he couldn't inhabit that space full of lies and memories of something that was never real. The past was now an unbearable weight, a chain he refused to carry. The phone vibrated in the passenger seat. He knew who he was. He didn't want to answer. But deep down, something inside him needed to hear it. He took out his cell phone and answered it without saying anything. On the other side, Emily's shaky breathing betrayed her condition. "Are you going back?" The question was almost pathetic. What did she expect? That he would simply ignore everything and remain by her side? He let out a dry, humorless laugh, feeling the bitter taste of irony in his mouth. "Back to what, Emily? To pretend none of this happened? To continue living a lie? I didn't want it to be like this, but it was. You did it. You can't just want to change now that everything has collapsed." The silence on the other side lasted for long seconds. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "I regret it." Michael closed his eyes, resting his forehead against the steering wheel. "Do you regret doing it or being caught?" Her silence was the answer he already knew. He ran a hand over his face, feeling tiredness weighing down his shoulders. "I wanted to love you, Michael. I swear I tried." He squeezed his eyes shut. "This is the worst of all. The fact that you thought you could force something that never existed." She choked on a sob on the other end. I just want. Michael interrupted, his voice now emotionless, without any trace of attachment. "It doesn't matter what you want anymore, Emily. You made your choice. I was just the idiot who took a while to realize it." He hung up without waiting for a response. There was nothing more to be said. The dawn advanced, and he drove aimlessly, not knowing where to go, not knowing where his new life would begin. He stopped in front of a bar, one of those small, discreet places, the kind of place that didn't ask questions, that only accepted people who needed a momentary escape. He went in and ordered a drink, anything that would numb his mind, at least for a few hours. The bar was half empty, a few lone figures scattered across the benches, each carrying their own ghosts. That's where he saw her. It wasn't the kind of meeting he planned, it wasn't the kind of moment he would imagine to meet someone, but still, she was there, sitting alone, twirling a glass in her hand while staring into space. His eyes were intense, but not in a flashy way, they were eyes that carried stories, that spoke of battles that no one saw. Something about her captured his attention immediately, perhaps because, at that moment, he felt like he was looking at someone who was also trying to rebuild himself. He thought about ignoring it, about just finishing his drink and moving on, but something made him come closer. He sat next to her at the counter, ordering another shot without looking directly. She turned her face slightly, analyzing him discreetly before letting out a slight smile. "It feels like you're carrying the weight of the world." Michael let out a sigh. "The world I knew ceased to exist a few hours ago." She didn't ask anything, just nodded, as if she understood perfectly what he meant. "I know what it's like." He looked at her, curious. "You too?" She smiled sideways, but it was a sad smile. "Let's say I understand well what it means to lose something you thought was real." The two remained silent for a few moments, just sharing each other's presence, without rushing, without expectations. For the first time in hours, Michael felt his mind slow down, felt that maybe there was something beyond the chaos. She raised her glass. "Here's to freedom, then." He hesitated for a second, then raised his too. "To freedom." The glasses touched with a light sound, and in that instant, something changed inside him. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like there was a path to follow. And this time, it would be your own path. Time passed and Michael found a new rhythm of life, away from the weight of the past that previously imprisoned him. He didn't come home that night or the following nights. Instead, he looked for a temporary apartment, something small and without history, a neutral space where he could start over without the ghosts that his old home carried. He let the divorce process proceed without major confrontation, without the arguments that Emily might have expected to have. He didn't want any more fights, he didn't want to try to find explanations for something that never made sense. He signed the papers with the coolness of someone who had already buried the past and moved on without looking back. Emily tried contact several times, long messages, detailed emails, attempts to explain, to justify, to look for one last chance. But Michael didn't respond. He learned that some things don't need to be answered, just left behind. It didn't take long for Emily to realize the impact of her choices. The separation was a brutal blow, but worse than that was the emptiness that was left when Michael was gone. She thought she would be able to follow, that she would have Richard by her side, that the old desire that guided her there would fill the space that Michael left. But the reality turned out to be very different. Richard didn't want commitment, he never did. The game was only fun as long as it involved risk, as long as there was something to be achieved. Now that Emily was alone, now that Michael was no longer a shadow between them, Richard lost interest. He slowly moved away, until one day he simply disappeared, without explanations, without goodbyes. Emily tried to look for him, tried to hold on to the idea that he would still be there, but all she found was silence. She lost them both. And for the first time, she found herself completely alone. No Michael, no Richard, no one to blame but herself. The days turned into weeks, and then months. Michael rebuilt his life little by little, without rushing, without the burden of trying to understand the past. He dedicated himself to work, took care of himself again, and rediscovered simple pleasures that he had long left aside. And then, without him looking, something unexpected happened. He felt it again. Not like before, not with the same chaotic intensity that once led him to the wrong marriage. But calmly, with the naturalness of someone who was finally ready to make room for something new. The woman at the bar, that random conversation on a night of anguish, ended up becoming a constant presence. First, as a friendship, something light, without expectations. But over time, the meetings became frequent, the smiles more natural, the conversations deeper. And when he realized, Michael felt something he didn't imagine possible after all. Peace. Emily, on the other hand, didn't find such a gentle fresh start. She tried to follow, tried to hold on to something, but everything around her seemed to fall apart. At work, the looks were different, the whispers in the corridors were inevitable. The scandal with Richard did not go unnoticed, and the reputation that previously guaranteed her stability was now a weight pushing her down. The company didn't take long to discreetly remove her, until she finally found herself without a job, without a relationship, without direction. Time passed and regret became a constant presence. She wanted to go back, she wanted to rebuild something, but there was no more space for that. Michael moved on, and she stayed behind. Richard also paid his price. The arrogance that made him feel untouchable was his own undoing. He thought he could do and undo it without consequences, but what happened to Emily wasn't the first, nor the last time. And eventually, his fame reached the wrong people. The company found out, the scandals came to light, and the position he used so much to manipulate others was ripped away from him. No power, no influence, no nothing. He disappeared from the map, carrying with him the same indifference he always carried. Michael, in turn, found something he never expected. A different love, without urgency, without fear. He learned that life didn't have to be about racing to achieve something unattainable. He found someone who didn't carry shadows from the past, who didn't make empty promises, who didn't try to fill gaps that should never have existed. He found a future without lies, without betrayals, without doubts. And this time, he didn't have to try to be enough. He simply was. Now I want to know, what did you think of this story? Comment your opinion, I want to read your every thought. And if you're not yet subscribed, subscribe to the channel for more intense stories like this. Remember, betrayal never leads to a happy ending. Here, we do not support infidelity, and all stories are created to show the consequences it can bring. Until next time.